Looks like we're just about ready to get started. Okay, well, hello. Welcome to the ADSA US-RSE Early Career Panel. My name is Ian Cosden. I'll be moderating today's panel. Before we get started, actually, let me share my screen. We have a few plugs from our sponsors and logistics to go over, and then we'll get right into introducing our distinguished set of panelists. So this is a joint panel between the U.S. Research Software Engineer Association and the Academic Data Science Alliance. So to start, Steve, I think you can introduce quickly ADSA.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Steve Van Tylen, the community manager with the Academic Data Science Alliance. We're a group, an organization that helps build communities of data science leaders, practitioners, and educators in academia with the hope of thoughtfully integrating data science best practices into the higher education setting. We have a number of activities that we run, a number of special interest groups. We have a career development network that a lot of folks on this call might be interested in participating in. We have a data science leadership community, a couple of annual meetings for practitioners and a separate meeting for data science leadership, and then a data science community newsletter that's quite popular. And you can find out more about ADSA at academicdatascience.org and sign up for our mailing list with the link down there at the bottom. We'll be sharing those links out afterwards.
Great, thanks, Steve. So on behalf of the US-RSE Association, I'm the current chair of the steering committee here. This is a community-driven organization with kind of three main goals of connecting people, those who are both writing and contributing to research software, perhaps the larger demographic of this audience, folks interested in careers in research software engineering, and those identifying as RSE allies. So maybe not necessarily a research software engineer themselves, but someone who wants to support this career path. Broader than just academia, all across anything that is doing research. These three goals are providing this community, allowing folks to interact, share resources and networking, advocating for the role, bringing awareness in the increasingly important role research software engineers play in research, and sharing resources to help folks in these different demographics. So there's a number of different activities we're involved with. We have a Slack workspace. That's where most of the discussion happens. If you join, it's free. You get an invite to the Slack workspace, along with a mailing list that we send out newsletters. We have various workshops, community calls on a monthly basis, an RSE Stories podcast. So Vanessa Sockett has been set up this really neat thing where she interviews various RSEs, so you get to hear more about what they do and their stories. And a few working groups ranging from things like education and training to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and more are popping up all the time. So here's a link of how to get connected. Follow us on Twitter. Reach out if you have questions. It's a rapidly growing group of really interesting people. So with that, a few logistic things we want to go over. I think we've all been doing this Zoom thing for a while, but please stay muted during the panel so the panelists can have the floor. Please submit questions via chat. This will be the easiest way if there are many of them, or use the raise hand feature. We'll try to call on you if there's something that doesn't quite lend itself to chat and you'd like to answer, like to have them hear it directly from you. Please, this is a jointly sponsored event, so we're going to follow both our code of conduct. There's nothing contradictory in here. Basically, be a good human, treat others with respect. If there are any issues, you can reach out to either Steve or Michaela Parker here. So Steve in private chat, or there are ways to report located in both of these code of conducts. As Steve mentioned, the first half of this panel, we'll have panelist introductions and a couple early questions. We'll be recording that and share that later. We'll stop the recording after these first couple questions and allow audience questions. That way you can feel free to ask whatever it is that you like, and there won't be a recording of it. So we encourage you to start submitting your questions, and we'll try to sort through them during the first half. So with that, I'd like to introduce our really wonderful set of panelists. We've asked them to each introduce themselves for a little bit to start. We'll go in this order. So we'll start with Brenna Hazelton. She's the Senior Research Scientist at University of Washington at the eScience Institute. So with that, Brenna, I will hand it over to you. I will make some noise when you have about 2 minutes left. Floor is yours.
I'm Brenna Hazelton. I'm a research scientist at the eScience Institute and at the physics department at the University of Washington. Sorry. My background is in astrophysics, and I spend about half my time currently doing research in the early universe with data from radio telescopes that I also help design and build. And I co-lead a research group in physics with a physics professor, and I mentor undergraduate and graduate students. The other half of my time is with eScience. And in particular, I'm very involved in the eScience Winter Incubator and the Summer Data Science for the Social Good programs. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about those because I think that they are important for understanding the kind of work that I do and that many other people in eScience do. So the incubator is a program where we match projects from across the university that need some data science expertise with the eScience data or research scientist for a 10-week intensive collaboration. And we're really trying to push the projects forward. These are really interdisciplinary collaborations. They are not consulting. They're not sort of data science for hire. And the projects are incredibly diverse, both in terms of discipline. We've worked with projects out of 25 plus departments over the last 7 years, and in the kinds of data science skills and methodologies that are required. So things including, data management and software practice, acceleration and cloud migration, statistics, machine learning, visualization. It kind of crosses all of those levels. And of course, different people in the eScience Institute are skilled in those different areas. Our data summer program, which is the Data Science for the Social Good, or I'll call it DSSG for short most of the time, was developed based both on that incubator model and on the University of Chicago's DSSG program. And it has some real similarities to the incubator, but it has some major differences too. One of the biggest ones is that we include around 4 full-time student fellows. These are mostly graduate students, but also some senior undergrads who join each team. So we have roughly 4 per team. And of course, the project also has to be addressing some aspect of social good, although we interpret that very broadly. And the projects also often come from outside of UW. They often come from nonprofits or local government agencies. And in addition to trying to really move the project forward, which of course happens because you've got 4 people working full time on it for 10 weeks, there's also a real significant focus on helping students develop strong data science skills, and specifically including skills around ethical data science practices, which really fits in with the social good aspect. So those are the 2 programs that I spend the most of my time within eScience working on as a data science lead on these projects. So I think I'll end there. Thanks.
Perfect. Great. Thanks, Brenna. All right, next up, we have Bernice Herman, a data science fellow and research staff, also at University of Washington, the eScience Institute. So Bernice, over to you.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Bernice Herman. So in my role, we shorten the role often to data scientists at eScience. And I think that's to contrast a bit with Brenna's role. So I'm really excited to be after Brenna. So she got lots of the basics of eScience Institute and a lot of the programs that I also participate out of the way, but maybe it's helpful to describe a bit of the difference. So Brenna is a part both of the eScience and hired through the her department separately. I, on the other hand, am 100% kind of hired into eScience. And what that means typically for my role is that I do a little bit more coverage of these programs, although it's really flexible and dependent on how interested and involved you want to be. Brenna's really active at eScience. And so what my role looks like is that I also am involved in a number of programs. So DSSG, the incubator, I teach multiple classes. And in fact, I see one current student and at least one past student in this group. So I'm excited to see that. So I teach multiple classes and participate in these programs and do the same sort of kind of deep collaboration with folks from different departments in my work, as well as having time for my own research that still supports kind of the interests of eScience. I'm a data scientist, and I do my own personal research is related to kind of interpretable machine learning and evaluation metrics for data science and machine learning. So it very much supports the same goals. And so my position, while looks a little bit different, at least as it relates to eScience, because I'm 100% time there. I've been in that role for 5.5 years now, which is a lot. It's crazy. And prior to joining eScience, I worked as a software engineer. In some ways, you could say a research software engineer, because we work directly with scientists in creating and implementing their research at Amazon. In addition to my role now at the eScience Institute as a data scientist, in mid-2020, I took that role to 50% time and have joined a startup called Y Labs. We do kind of, we build tools for monitoring machine learning pipelines in production using approximate statistics methods. And I think that actually, that role gives a lot of context for what I understand, and kind of my efforts in industry in general gives a lot of context for what I think of as like a research software engineer and how that differs from a researcher and so on and so forth. So I think in that role, I spend a lot of time thinking about, how do companies and like, what is the state of the art and kind of best practice for doing data science at a very large scale. We have customers who say, we have this many terabytes of data that we want to process. And there's certainly some science that handles a lot of data as well. I think Brenna is certainly in that space. But I think sometimes I see methods that are really handling these things at scale in industry that I like to bring back to the environment at the university. And it's really great to be in my role because I'm able to know a bit of both sides, on the research side and in industry, and kind of finding best practice and supporting those who are in other fields with best practices. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Bernice. Next up, we have Chris Holgrath, who is the Director for the International Interactive Computing Collaboration, or 2I2C. Chris, over to you.
Hey, everybody. Let me share a screen with 2 really quick slides just to make it easier to talk through this stuff. Okay, so my name is Chris Holgrath. Thanks for the introduction. I'm the director of 2I2C, the International Interactive Computing Collaboration. And just to give a little bit of background on me, so I started off my kind of research world in the neuroscience community, actually, and did my PhD at Berkeley. And my kind of trajectory into this path was that, probably much like many of you, as a part of doing that research, I needed to do more and more computational kinds of work. I guess what we would now call like data science work. And so, I had to learn Python. I had to do all of that kind of stuff in a very DIY, like grad student, there's no formal training for this kind of manner. And basically over that period of time, I got more and more involved in open source communities, particularly in the neuroscience community, a project called MNePython, which is like an electrophysiology analytics toolbox. And so basically throughout graduate school, I kind of shifted my focus to be a little bit less domain specific and a little bit more like open source infrastructure specific. And by the end of graduate school, realized that I thought that a more appropriate path for myself would be to focus more on that infrastructure side of things and its intersection with domain-specific work rather than being primarily a domain scientist. So after that, I took a 2-year fellowship with the Berkeley Institute for Data Science, where I worked on a bunch of different projects in the kind of focusing around the Jupyter ecosystem. I helped with a project called Binder, which is this large online platform for reproducible interactive computing environments. I worked a lot with the Jupyter Hub team, which is a project that tries to offer like remotely accessible interactive computing environments on some kind of shared infrastructure, often cloud infrastructure. And I also collaborated quite a lot with other researchers and educators at the university, particularly around what's now called the Berkeley Division of Data Science. And so what we would do in many cases was kind of bring the infrastructure perspective to use cases that we had at Berkeley around either research communities or educational communities. You know, we ran this really, really large Jupyter Hub for a couple thousand students for an introductory data science course. And as a part of doing that, we continuously contributed upstream to open source projects that are underlying all of that infrastructure. And as I'm sure many of you know, for a project that's as large and complex and successful as Jupyter, it's actually like a huge challenge to get people to contribute back upstream and sort of improve the core technology. And we tried to embody those values of like, we don't create our own things, we use other people's things, and then we improve those things at Berkeley in deploying this infrastructure. And so over time, we realized that this was, I think, a really powerful model of production, both for serving education and research and for serving the open source communities underneath. And so in the last 6 to 8 months, I've been working on a new project called the International Interactive Computing Collaboration. This is launched in partnership with a few other co-founders across the research and the educational communities. And we're launching in collaboration with the International Computer Science Institute, which is sort of serving as our organizational umbrella right now. The goal of 2I2C is to be a nonprofit organization that both offers managed cloud services around the Jupyter Hub and sort of broader interactive computing ecosystem for research and education, and that has a strong commitment to developing in partnership with open source communities and helping them improve their tools so that we can improve our cloud services. So trying to bring this kind of model of co-production to a broader audience by creating an organization that can just run it as a service. So a lot of our focus right now is on putting together these kind of managed services where we're managing that cloud infrastructure, but it's really your infrastructure. It's not our infrastructure. It's only running on entirely modular, composable, open source components. And if you wanted to, you could just take it over yourself and start running it on your own if you didn't want to use 2I2C for it anymore. So really trying to like thread that needle between software as a service, because you don't want to have to worry about the infrastructure, but without all of the potential downsides of like vendor lock-in and cloud lock-in and things like that. So we're trying to kind of understand that space and understand how we can best support research and education communities that would benefit from that infrastructure. And as a part of that, we're hoping to hire and bring on a lot of effectively some combination of cloud engineers and infrastructure developers in the Jupyter and broader ecosystems that can both help serve those deployments and that can upstream those contributions back to open source communities that we use. So that's a little bit about 2I2C and myself, and I am happy to chat more about it later on. So thanks.
Great, thanks, Chris. Next up, we have Christina Maimon. She's the Research Data Services Lead at Northwestern University. Christina, over to you.
Hi. Yes, so I'm at Northwestern, and I work with the research computing group there, which is part of the central IT at the university. So we support and work with researchers from all different domains and all different schools at the university. My job is a consulting or sort of service-oriented role where the focus is on helping others with their research rather than leading research of my own. So unlike some of the other folks here, I'm generally not taking on projects that are sort of my initiative. It doesn't mean I'm not collaborating and working with other researchers, but I'm not directing my own research agenda, which is something I actually like and wanted in this role. So I am primarily a data scientist, but I also cross into research, software engineering work, and help researchers with programming skills and their code. So again, like a lot of the others, a combination of the skills here. There's a lot of overlap between these different types of positions. And so I'm also on the US-RSE steering committee with Ian, because a lot of data science work also is RSE work. So in my current position, there's 2 of us that are staff currently, and then we have a team of graduate student consultants as well. We teach workshops on data science skills and programming skills and data visualization. We do individual consultations with student and faculty researchers. We lead some small working groups. And then we also do medium and long-term collaborations with faculty. Sometimes those really are collaborations. Sometimes it's a little bit of data science or data visualization for hire, sort of a flexible situation. We see what folks need and how we can do that. Sometimes it's free, sometimes it's fee-based, sometimes we are part of grants, a little bit of everything. So yes, we cover all kinds of data science skills, data visualization, computer programming, and then a lot of just other random things that come up, technical obstacles that researchers have in their work and they don't know who else to ask or get help from. So this goes into research data management sometimes, or making databases, or automating workflows, or what is the cloud thingy and how do I use it? And, is it possible to use machine learning on this question? Whole range of questions sort of come our way when there isn't somebody else to help or answer those questions. My background has sort of always been a combination of social science and sort of computing and data analysis. So undergrad, I had a social science research major and a computer science minor. I went to graduate school for political science, but I also did a degree in statistics at the same time. When I graduated, it was before data science was a term, and there weren't also as many of these positions in academia. So I worked for a while at a small government contractor doing computational social science work. And then at some point I decided to look for a new job and found a position somewhat similar to my current one at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, sort of a combination data scientist, research software engineer role. And it was very exciting. It was what I'd always sort of wanted to do coming out of graduate school, hadn't found that position before. Did that work for a couple of years and then moved to Chicago, and I'm at Northwestern currently. So I really, like I said, it's work I wanted to do. It's really enjoyable. I get to learn new things all the time. I get to work with a wide range of research topics, projects now that are currently about the international art market, which I knew nothing about, opioid addiction, medical students, how they go through medical school. We have a project looking at some of the student performance, and then we get consults all the time about different topics. So it's get to learn and use a lot of different skills.
Cool, great, thank you, Christina. All right, last but certainly not least, we have Zhong Li, who's the Deputy Associate Director for Software at NCSA, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So over to you, Zhong.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to meet you. Again, my name is Zhong Li. I'm a Deputy Associate Director of Software at NCSA. Some of you maybe haven't heard the NCSA. It stands for National Center for Supercomputing Applications. It's established in 1986 as one of the original sites of NSF-funded supercomputing center. And some people know about NCSA through Blue Waters mission we hosted, which is called Big Iron. However, we are not just providing the supercomputing resources or services. We do a lot of application development and work with various domains of science that developing and help their science. So recently, NCSA, we went through reorganization, and in our directorate, my directorate is software, we just started 1 year ago. We actually went through the 1 anniversary, I think. So I've been in this position for one year and 2 months, I believe. For information, I also don't have any CS background. I have a PhD in urban planning. I studied regional economics and transportation planning and GIS, or geospatial analysis. And I was hired at NCSA as a postdoc originally because they were looking for somebody's able to do GIS programming, and then postdoc is easy way to hire someone very quickly in the university setting. So they just hired me as a postdoc. Afterwards, I was promoted to research scientist and then senior research scientist. And I had managed a small group of 5 people. Then it grows into 25. And then right now, software directorate, I'm overseeing, we have a 40 staff, including myself. And currently we're running around the 40 projects, from small project to large project. So especially our organization, we are part of the University of Illinois, and then we are all grant-based, which means that everybody's salary is based on the projects. So we very actively writing grant proposals, and also try to looking forward to collaborators, different applications and domain of science. So we are keep expanding. Some of the goal of software directorate is most important part is developing software in support of science. So a lot of project we do have, our staff, including myself, we sometimes become a co-PI of the projects so that we are able to provide them the software and cyber infrastructure to advance their science and scientific research. And while this thing happens, I really like to have other people introduction. We promote a lot of open source project. We participate, contribute, and also we initiating and creating the open source community also. So we always leveraging technologies and various works. And throughout this time, we also realized that we need to train and building out the research software engineer staff. And then we identify that some of the aspects they only experience through the settings in academia. And also because I'm overseeing other leaders of the groups in the directorate, one of my main interests recently is how to train the leaders of RSE staffs. I think there's a little bit different aspect of the managers of IT staff versus managers of RSE. So that's another very interesting aspect for me right now. Personally, in terms of research area, I'm always interested in geospatial data and analysis and visualization. And also, because of the project I went through, I gained the knowledge of how to build an end-to-end cyber infrastructure, including from the hardware to the software and middleware and front-end and back-end, all 9 yards. That actually bring me into some position to work with other directors within my organization. So some of the networking people, some of storage people, some people dealing with the computations, and then we are doing the software because as everybody knows, the DevOps and current new technologies really bring those people together very quickly. So I'm involved in those architecture designs and discussions also. Some of the major projects I'm involved in, among 40 projects, the one is developing software and platform for community resilience. So some of you heard about community resilience due to the natural disaster, which usually means that is when earthquake hits a community, how quickly the community can recover back to a normal stage. There's a community resilience. So there is a funded Center of Excellence by the NIST. Their research topic is come up with a scientific research and algorithm so that physical community and researchers could use those things through the platform so that they're able to plan and prepare for natural disaster. Another project we are doing a lot is the Clouder. Some of you may have heard about the scientific data management systems funded by NSF CSSI effort, but it was actually developed for the last 10 years as open source project. So it is really good to see that the infant stage of the software to mature stage and how we can grow in the open source community through that project. And another interesting topic we're dealing with the hypoxia issues in the Gulf area. Some of you knows that lack of oxygen, so a lot of fish die, that's the hypoxia. And then that involves a lot of collaboration of the states around the Great River. So we work with them to bring their sensor data together. So we provide them some of the platform to organize and centralize those monitoring data and provide a way for them to analyze those informations. So those things are just example of some of the project I do, but I really interested in those building out those cyber infrastructure and then how to outreach not just researchers, but also sometimes general public to help them to understand the scientific research in their layman's term also. I think that's it for me. Nice to meet you all.
Great. Thank you, Jung. Super. Thank you, panelists. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we have a few prepared questions that we think might be of common interest that we're going to get to first while we're still recording. Please, if you have questions for the panelists, now's a good time to start putting them in chat so we can behind the scenes sort through them and get them ready to go. So our first question that we have for the panelists, and maybe I can pick on you, Brenna, and start with you on this, is how did you find out about your current job you're in? Where was it advertised? How did job seekers find positions that are similar to this? Can you share some of your experience on the job hunt here?
Sure. I have to start out by saying that the way I found the job is not a general solution for most people. So I had to go do a little research to find out how you might find the job in general. I found the job because my postdoc mentor saw a departmental email about a postdoc position with eScience, which was available at the time. And he suggested maybe I should apply to that to sort of develop some data science skills because I was thinking about going that direction. And I applied and was told I was too senior for the role, but maybe I could apply to the research scientist position they just posted. But in general, as kind of Bernice pointed out, there's two primary roles at eScience that are very similar in a lot of ways in terms of how they engage with eScience, although how much of the time they spend on it is different, but they're very different in terms of funding. So my role is a research scientist, and that's a joint position between another department and eScience. And it really requires an appointment at another department or an offer of an appointment. And so those are now advertised basically internally to UW because that other part is a requirement. And it's also a soft money position to some extent. And so you do have to have potential to continue to secure external funding, et cetera. The eScience data science positions are fully funded positions by eScience, as Bernice mentioned. And those are posted through UW Hires, which is the standard UW hiring portal. And they are advertised to some degree. I'm not sure how much that is. I was trying to find out and I couldn't get that information. So maybe Bernice could fill that out a little bit more.
Sounds like a good segue to you, Bernice.
I'm happy to jump in. So yeah, I did eventually apply on UW Hires, so the university's kind of job portal that has kind of all of the jobs, and there may have been some advertising. I think in the 5 years that I've been in this role, at the time that I applied, it was very much focused at UW. There was an ad out for a number of jobs. It wasn't maybe very widely published. And the way that I found the role is I happened to meet Jake Vanderplas, a past eScience member, at a talk. And we discussed, and then I applied. Now, kind of going forward, I think eScience has done a much better job of reaching out to more external portals for some job roles, particularly those. I don't know the extent that they do it for the research scientist role, but I have seen them do it for things like developer evangelists, certainly any research science engineer roles. Those things are things that they're more conscious of, we need to reach out beyond kind of the industry scope and maybe put this on Indeed or things like that. They are really hard to miss though, just the small amount of roles that are like this compared to the many other roles that use the words data science and software engineer and things like that. So they're pretty hard to find, and it's worthwhile finding organizations that might have that role and keeping up to date with their communications and things like that.
Great, thanks, Bernice. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one path that I've seen others follow, I shouldn't really talk about my own experience because I've basically created my own job, which is not an easy, I would not recommend that everybody go and start a nonprofit to create their own job. That's a lot of work. But I think that where we're looking for people and where I've sort of made connections along these lines in the past is by figuring out where there are informal communities around a particular practice or around a particular kind of job, and where those communities have conversations, because oftentimes ideas for like new jobs, understanding what those jobs entail, understanding kind of like what you need to do to get to be well positioned for them. It involves like speaking to other people that are in similar kinds of roles. Which, to be honest, like forums like these ADSA group conversations and what are a great way to make those connections. So I know in the open source community, for example, a lot of, and when I say open source, I mean kind of like big collaborative, like multi-stakeholder style projects like, you know, Jupyter and NumPy and, you know, that whole ecosystem. A lot of those conversations happen on Twitter or on, you know, one of the Gitter channels or on the GitHub issues of those projects. And I know a number of people that have gotten jobs ultimately either directly in those communities or via, you know, adjacent organizations that employ people that work on that stack, because they just were embedded by making their own contributions, by participating in their, you know, in whatever events or whatever spaces for conversation they had. So it's one thing that I would recommend doing is like, think about who are other people that you know that seem to be doing this kind of work, and figure out where they spend their time and where they have conversations. In a post-COVID world, I would say figure out where they have their meetups and things like that, and just talk to them. And oftentimes information about jobs will percolate through those networks in useful kinds of ways.
Super. Thanks, Chris. Christina?
I got my last positions in a pretty normal way on job boards. So my current one, I knew I wanted to move to Chicago and I knew what kind of job I wanted. So I honestly just looked at what jobs were available at Northwestern and the University of Chicago and some other universities around. So it was a very targeted search. Before that, my position at Stanford, the job title was research analytics consultant. So a lot of these roles will have very, you know, very strange job titles. Even my current one is not something you would normally think to look for. When we hire now, been trying to use more accessible job titles. So on my team, we added someone, and her job title is data scientist, which helps. It helps find more people. We can post it. It is a findable job. When I was searching for jobs myself, I would usually search for very few terms and see what came up. I'd search for PhD and data. So I was looking for roles that would value graduate school and a PhD in some way, and then was doing something related to data. And I would sort of sort through those jobs and see what was available. And that's sort of, it'd be in academia or in industry as well. But I found those to be good search terms.
Super. Thanks, Christina. John?
Looking for a mute button. So I'm agree with somebody else. How I get this position is very unusual. But recently I'm involved in HR to hiring the research programmers a lot, so I can give some information. So the NCSA point of view, we posting the job postings to our website and also jobs.illinois.edu. Also, we utilize other job posting sites like a Glassdoor, Smart Recruiters, and also Inside Higher Ed Careers. And if you also search on Google, like the research programmer and opening position and things like that, and it seems like they have a good way to, good user interface now to show all the job positions and information about it. Interesting thing recently happening is that I learned from the HR process is when you look at the job descriptions, there is called the requirement and preference. So when the requirement is a very important part, I didn't know, because if your resume or your some of the information does not meet the requirements, sometimes it didn't go to the reviewer or interview at all. So I think maybe that depending on different universities, but that's the University of Illinois policy. So when you apply for and looking for these jobs and you find a good position, then it's really good to understand what the requirement aspect is. And then they're also happy to answer any questions regarding job position, especially like our organization, we always grant funded salary based, which means that there's certain project needs behind the job position. So if you contact the HR, usually they can tell you what kind of potential project you're gonna working on when you're hired. So those things are very useful information, because then you can also prepare yourself, get familiar with those projects, so you can have a good interview also.
Super. Great. Thanks. Okay, so on to our next question we have for prepared. What skills background, do you think are most necessary in a data science or research software engineer role? So maybe to not always put Bryn on the spot first, maybe we can start with you, Bernice, and work our way around.
Sure. Yeah. So skills. So, I mean, I think some of the commentary about the different job titles also applies to, sometimes you have roles that seem similar, but really mean very different things. I think that applies, especially in the academic kind of space, because there's lots of different institutional structure that will remain, and people are navigating around in their roles, but kind of applies in data science in general. So it's really hard. I mean, I think in some roles, knowing statistics is a huge thing, and kind of especially supporting other people in research and trying to help them determine whether or not you can approach this research with whatever statistical tools that data science has to offer in that space. But in a lot of other cases, it's something more like software engineering. How do you get this done? And so even if you're not the best software engineer, being able to be autonomous and actually make progress on projects is a huge thing. But yeah, there's lots of other things. I think there's so many pieces to this role that it really just kind of depends on the organization.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I would consider kind of like separating out is, I think that we've talked about, really in my mind, two very, very different career tracks thus far. One of them is research software engineer, and one of them is something like a data scientist. In my mind, those are two like completely different positions, in the sense that a data scientist is often more kind of like investigative in nature. They're like exploring and playing around and answering questions, often like in much closer collaboration with another researcher or someone on a domain side. Whereas a software engineer is really more of a like, they're developing software, they're like an engineer, and the pathways to those may be different and the skills useful for them may be different. I think that something that is probably jointly shared between both in terms of skill set that's really important is really good communication and collaboration skills, particularly of an asynchronous nature, because when you're working on code or when you're working on analyses that you're sharing with others, I think that it's just more common in those workflows to be doing work not at the same time, where you have like some kind of shared repository and you need to have conversations around this like co-production of that repository, but it's not happening like face-to-face all the time in the way that a lot of other research scientific projects tend to work. So finding experience with those kinds of workflows and finding experience with like productively communicating ideas and negotiating and discussing with other people in a like remote asynchronous way is, I think, a really helpful skill set for both of those career paths.
Super. Christina, any thoughts?
I second that on communication skills. It's probably the most challenging part of our job, is how you work with researchers at all different experience levels and all different backgrounds, and how you work with people who are experts in their own field, but maybe know nothing about what you know. And so finding out ways to communicate that and to teach both formally and informally. When I'm evaluating folks for roles, whether it's student roles or staff roles, looking for people who have learned multiple technologies before, whatever they were, just so that they, I know that they know how to pick up something new, they know how to investigate something, solve problems, look for solutions on their own, and then can communicate about that and share that. Because in my role, it's less about the very specific skills. There's some core ones, but it's not like I need you to know off the top of your head the function in Python to do X, Y, or Z. It's that I need you to be able to figure that out quickly, learn new things, solve problems, and then communicate that to other researchers.
Great, thanks. John? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. I think similar aspect, I can distinguish a little bit between the RSE versus RSE leaders. So RSE, the necessary skill definitely is a communication, because the software engineers, research software engineers, often they're in the situation to consult or talking or understand the requirement from the science and what they want, and turn that into some of the task, or turn that into some architectural design. and then later they need to explain why they made that decision to the researchers. I think that so the communication skill is very important. And another aspect we find is how to managing the expectation also, because we are doing the software development. Sometimes it looks very shiny. That doesn't mean that it has a lot of scientific value behind it. So, but interestingly, the developing the front end take a lot of time sometimes. So we have to, the staff need to know how to manage the expectation when they communicate with the researchers to make sure that what staff gonna deliver to them is really understood by the researchers. So it's always constant communication regarding how to meet that expectation. But the leaders, it's an interesting thing we find out is that definitely we also work with the project managers in our organization too. But sometimes we are in the situation with our project managers. So RSE leaders need to be manage the project also. So task management and also work with a PI of the project, who are usually a scientist or professor, to see that what the really urgent needs or what is a priority of the grant is, so that the leaders are able to plan for those things and create a roadmap to the PI to understand. Also expecting that can change very quickly, because all this NSF requirement, NIH requirement, depending on their site visit or review, sometimes the direction totally changes sometimes. So leaders know how to manage their risk, manage the change controls, so that that's the less impact to the staff they're manage also.
Great, thanks, John. Brenna?
I'll keep it short because I think I agree with most people who've already spoken. But I agree. I think the split between the research scientist, the research software engineer, and the data scientist is a reasonable way to describe it. Although I write a lot of software, but my note was listening. It's related to this communication issue. But when you work on interdisciplinary collaborations that are truly across wide differences, the language is so different. And even language for about the same thing, statistics is a really good example. The language that's used across different departments and different fields is wildly different. And so keeping active listening and repeating back what you heard and making sure your understanding is key.
Great. Okay, we have one more prepared question, and then we're going to.
Could I give a quick follow-up to that?
Of course.
Sorry. Another job title that people might look into for either inspiration of something that they want to do, or just for inspiration about like the kinds of skill sets that are useful here, that's not super common in the academic world, is a job title called a product manager. And that's a role that often exists within a company, and their job is to sort of like wrangle the various stakeholders around a given product that company is putting out, to try and sort of convert the different perspectives and desires into like a coherent, cohesive, and useful product. And while academics often don't think of themselves as creating like products, in many ways that is the output of a lot of this work. It's like you're balancing, to Brenna's point, you're balancing like different perspectives and different languages, and you're trying to create something together. And it's really hard to do that in a way that does that kind of elegantly. And one of the most common words that people use for a good product manager is a word they call empathy, right? Which is sort of like seeing the world from the other person's perspective. So I would follow up on just the world of product management, if that kind of thing sounds of interest to you, and just sort of learn about what are the sorts of things that they talk about for that role.
Great, thanks. So we have one more prepared question, and then we're going to get to questions in the chat and open things up. So last one is, can you describe your typical day, whether you be a research software engineer, data scientist, or somewhere in between? Just kind of what do you do on a regular basis, and what are some of the most challenging and rewarding aspects of your role? So maybe let's start with you, Chris, as we work our way through.
Sure. So again, I don't know if my role is the most representative of this kind of career track, but what I can do is kind of describe the sorts of roles that we're employing on like the engineering side. And effectively what those folks are going to do is two things. One of them is help sort of operate and manage cloud infrastructure around interactive data analysis. And a lot of that's going to entail having conversations with people that are using that infrastructure, understanding like how those people want things to change, how they, if they think there's something broken, if they think there's something that they want improved, and then figuring out ways to translate that into features that we contribute to open source projects. So it's kind of like a translation layer between scientific and educational use cases and the sort of needs that they have, and then understanding the open source pieces underlying our infrastructure and figuring out like where in the open source community those improvements need to be made in order to like meet the demands of the users on the infrastructure side. So it's much more on the engineering side of things. It's very much you are empowering other researchers in their use cases rather than like us working on those use cases ourselves. But yeah, on a daily basis, it's basically sort of like moving back and forth between like, education and research perspective, and then over to the open source and infrastructure perspective, and just sort of seesawing that in a way that lets the information from one benefit development in the other. So I mean, in practice, it's like a lot of GitHub issues and like having conversations in these like public spaces, and making contributions via pull requests on code repositories and reaching out to other communities to figure out what's the best way to improve their own code. It's that kind of open source workflow.
Very nice. Thanks, Chris. Christina?
Sure. My job is very varied. I have a lot of different responsibilities because I'm both doing the role of helping other people and also trying to manage and sort of lead our service, and making sure that that still functions, making sure that our other staff and consultants are all taken care of, meeting with them, helping them develop. So often in a week, I'll have 1 or 2 sort of individual consults with somebody whose question has come in. We have a intake form, and we sort of distribute the consults to people who think that they can help. So we'll set up currently Zoom meetings and check in with them. Might be teaching a short workshop. I teach a lot of workshops on R currently, but we do Python and data visualization and databases, all kinds of other topics. Spend time working with things like this, actually. So working on things for people like me in academia, in the community. So working with US-RSE Association, working with some of the research computing groups. Spend some time doing that. Spend time reporting. So my position is not grant funded, which is nice. So I don't have to apply for grants to keep my job and keep my funding, but it doesn't mean that we don't have to justify what we do and our impact. And so I spend a lot of time also reporting on what we do. So counting people who we do consults with, counting people who come to our workshops, and reporting that outward and upward, and trying to advocate for increased positions and funding to support what we do.
Great. Thanks, Christina. John?
Okay, mine is not the typical, but the 2 parts here. One is sometimes I do the pull request review because I'm not actively developing, but they really needs my testing and then understanding of the system. So sometimes I become a tester and review the code, especially geospatial related ones. I review the code also. Another aspect is, like other people mentions, the writing a grant or the connecting with the collaborators, managing the project is a major half of my time. And another times I do is working with the leads. So this is maybe interesting thing some of people are interested in is we are very much try to customize some of the career path growth of the staff. So when I have a one-on-one meeting with the leads, we discuss about what's the next project to helpful for this staff so that they can grow in a different area and things like that. So this is not exactly RSE staff, but if you're thinking about promotion into manager level, those areas can be very helpful to think about, because there's no set answers or there's no kind of framework to help us right now. So we're building up those career path growth kind of the framework at the NCSA. And this is a very rewarding aspect because you can see that how the people can grow through this kind of process.
Super. Sounds good. Thanks. Next, Brenna.
So I already mentioned I have this split role, and so about half my time I end up doing sort of things that you'd expect more at a more academic PI role, writing grants, and I also do some actual data analysis, but a lot of working with students. On the eScience side, it depends, what's being run at the moment. But if we're doing an incubator or a DSSG, I spend a huge amount of time engaged in those projects. And there, I typically am not writing a lot of code. What I'm doing for the incubator, I think it's really important that the project leads who've come in own the software that they write and that they understand it when they leave, because this is only a 10-week program, so they need to be able to use the software afterward. So what I'm doing is looking at code with them, kind of like a code review, but more informal. I'm looking at plots. I'm coming up with ideas, statistical ideas to try new data visualizations, reading a bunch of stuff in their domain and also in sort of statistical related domains that might have something to do with what they're trying to do and figure out what to try next. On the DSSG side, it's some of that, but it's also kind of trying to help the students grow. So help them learn new skills, point them in the right directions, and also kind of lead the overall project. So those are the kinds of things I ended up doing. And then in eScience, we also do these office hour things, which are sort of drop-in consulting things where I'm kind of helping somebody figure out where to go next on whatever they've dropped in to talk to me about. So it's kind of a range of things.
Super. Bernice?
Yeah, I'll be quick because I think everything is covered. So my day-to-day, a lot of it is spent doing these programs. So participating, if we have a program actively running, it's participating in some kind of longer term engagement with some project that is likely in a field that I don't know or that I myself am not in. So lots of time is spent kind of trying to understand the basics of that field while also pushing the project forward, as well as, building my own skills and doing kind of part of my job is doing my own personal research. So I'm continuing to push information and things there. The rest of my time, I teach many classes. So a lot of my time is spent kind of teaching and all of the things that go with teaching. But in addition to, formal coursework, we give a lot of workshops, and some of them impromptu, some of them a little more regular. So preparing those teaching material, reading about pedagogy, lots of stuff like that.
Super, thanks. So that we're going to shift over now to audience questions. We've got a running list we've been collecting from chat. Michaela, I think we're going to turn off recording here.
Yep, that's right. I'm turning it off right now.